My name is Howard Goodrow. I'm the Executive Director of the Alzheimer's Association here in Vermont. So glad you could join us here today. We've got a very informal, I think relaxed meeting for you today. Some is us talking to you, some is you talking to us, and a lot of sharing later on that Lindsay will get to. But we have some great guests today, great speakers that'll kind of talk through their experience, both with the disease personally and with the disease as a caregiver. Senator Hooker's going to share some words with us to give us an update from the Capitol. And I just wanted to start out by kind of giving you the overall picture in Vermont. So we have over 13,000 people in Vermont living with Alzheimer's disease who are over 65. That doesn't even count the people who are dealing with early onset, as you'll hear from Pamela in a bit here. It's a devastating disease, as I'm sure you all know. I think everybody here clearly has been impacted in one way or another. The impact on the individuals is one part of it. And then there are 26,000 plus people in the state who are unpaid caregivers. And many of you probably fit that category as well. And that's a toll that can't really be measured. And we can throw numbers at it and put a financial number to it, but when you talk about people who have to leave their jobs to go support someone, or people who have to take time off from work, or people who can't leave their home because of the need to stay with their loved one, it takes both an emotional, a financial, and just an overall personal toll on everything that anybody dealing with this disease is going through. So personally, I've got it. My mother's got dementia. She lives down in Grantham, New Hampshire, with my sister. Somewhat early stages, so we haven't kind of been through the hardest part of it yet. And none of us obviously are looking forward to that, but we know that there are services out there that can at least help support us. There's not a lot medically that can be done at this point, but we're making progress on that front as well. This past year, many of you probably heard about Aduhelm, which is the latest drug to fight Alzheimer's. It's the first drug that actually approaches the disease from the disease perspective rather than the symptoms. It actually attacks the disease. It has a lot of flaws, there are a lot of problems with it, it's very expensive, but it's a first step. It's kind of like the first cancer drug or the first AIDS drug. It's not perfect, but it's the step in the door that we feel like we need. There are 3 to 5 drugs currently in third stage clinical trials right now that are getting close to that approval point, or at least the approval decision point. So we're very optimistic about where we're headed. I love being down here in Rutland. I grew up in Woodstock and actually went to St. Joseph's when there still was a St. Joseph's. My dad was the academic dean over there, so a lot of memories in this town for me. So I'm happy to be here. I'm thrilled you're all able to join us today. We've got a lot of partners in Rutland from a care facility standpoint and a caregiver standpoint. We also have a walk here in Rutland that many of you probably have been to in September. It's a fledgling walk. We're looking for more people to build that up, but we're getting there. It's making progress. It's grown. It doubled its growth last year, so we're hoping to make some great progress again this year. So the lineup today, we're going to go through. Pamela's going to talk about living with Alzheimer's. Betsy's going to talk about having a parent who has Alzheimer's and what that all entails. Senator Hooker, as I mentioned, is going to talk about what's going on at the State House. Lindsay is going to talk you through kind of services end of things, as well as we're all kind of walk through together an exercise that we'll try to outline what services are needed down here that we don't currently have, and what you feel like your needs are that aren't being met. And then there's an opportunity to do a video with Lindsay, for anybody who might be interested in that, that we're trying to give a voice to this disease and put those messages out there on the internet, whatever that means these days. It's far too big for me to wrap my arms around. And then we'll just wrap things up and with any follow-up toward the end. So there's coffee, bagels, sugar packets, whatever you need. In the back of the room, there's tea back there as well. So again, this is very, very casual, so if you need to stop anybody, ask any questions, feel free to do that. If you need to get up and grab something, that's more than welcome. Restrooms, if you don't know, are right around the corner here on the left. And with that, I'll turn it over to Pamela to get us really started. People you really want to talk to.
Hi everybody, I'm Pamela Smith. I live in Middlebury, Vermont. So the first thing I'm supposed to talk about, I used to just read, and that was boring. So I've switched over to winging it with cue cards, and we're going to see how that goes. So about age 50, I started noticing that I was having memory problems that were impacting my work. Every 3 months I would go to my doctor. That's just was our normal thing, quarterly. And every 3 months I would tell her that my memory problems were getting worse, and I got a nice collection of misdiagnoses. As a woman, of course, must be menopause. Of course, that had already happened, so I thought it was a little strange to connect something that finished up about 5 years ago to memory problems now. And all of the treatments, pills, to address whatever the misdiagnosis was, it didn't make the memory get any better. The memory just kept getting worse. So during this time, I am starting to develop quite a lot of anxiety. If you don't know who you saw an hour ago and you're on your way to the office to write a note about who you saw an hour ago, that's a little nerve-wracking. So I was taking meticulous notes so that I could write my notes. And having to work a lot of extra hours because of all of the extra stuff I was doing to make sure that my clients were well served and that I was able to capture the monthly activities that I had done to support my clients. Finally, one day at work, I had already noticed I was losing some sense of time, but I had a day at work where I thought I had spent about an hour working on a note that should have taken 15 minutes, 10 minutes. I went to a school where writing was absolutely required, and I had historically become a very, very fast writer. So to have this real slow down, having not remembering how to spell words, which I know now with, spell check, we're all gotten a little weak, but this was beyond weak. I was having to look up, like, improbable, like just silly words. So after about an hour, I was feeling really grim, and I looked up at the clock, and it had been 4 hours that I'd been working on that 15-minute note. So I called my doctor, and she wasn't in, and I got a sub, and he said, well, that doesn't sound right. I'm like, yeah, my best friend came up for a whole weekend. I introduced her to my family. Apparently, I have no recollection of this. And she keeps on being like, oh yeah, I met so-and-so that weekend. And the weekend was gone. It just was gone. So so eventually I had to tell her because she kept on making so many references, and I was, faking it. Oh, that's right. I just got tired of that. So I told her the truth. And she's probably the first person. I mean, my family knew. I was telling my family, and my daughter had already started taking over my finances because I realized I couldn't manage them anymore. So I left work pretty immediately. My last day of work was 2 weeks into COVID. It took me about 8 months to get diagnosed. I was very lucky. Now it's up to a year to get into the memory clinic. That's after the time it takes you to convince somebody to make a referral to the memory clinic. So the diagnostic process right now is taking even longer, I think. For people with early onset, this is a word of mouth thing, because I attend early onset support groups. It seems to take us about 2 or 2.5 years to get diagnosed. To have somebody listen, that's 2 years. And then whatever time the diagnostic process takes. So I think some of it is that I don't look what people who look like Alzheimer's look like. No dyes, no, this is not, I walk in the doctor's office and I can guess why they're thinking, that's ludicrous. But here it is, Alzheimer's can get diagnosed even quite a bit younger than me. And it changes your life. So I think some of it was just the medical community didn't think of me. One of the biggest challenges is that the importance of something has no relationship to whether or not I will remember or forget it, which is very hard for other people to understand. So my granddaughter, who just turned 7, she of course believes that I should remember everything that's important to her that I was a part of, and I don't. I hardly ever do. And so she comes up and she gets right her face to mine and forehead to mine, and she goes, "I hate that Alzheimer's." I'm like, don't we all, honey? I think that the biggest surprise was sort of there's a real feelings roller coaster to having Alzheimer's. When I actually got diagnosed, I actually felt relieved. I mean, it had been years of me saying something's wrong. And I worked in the mental health field for my entire career, so 35 years or something. And 18 of it was working for crisis services. And we often encountered people with dementia who suddenly had problematic behaviors and families didn't know what to do. I know what memory looks like and the differences when Alzheimer's is hitting. I made many, many referrals for people who I thought might have Alzheimer's or another dementia. So I felt like I had a pretty good handle on, oh, you're getting old and not remembering well. Not that old. And this is qualitatively, not just quantitatively, a different, I don't remember things compared to other people not remembering things. And one of those big differences is most people remember the important stuff and you throw out the fluff. I retain plenty of fluff, and it's totally a crapshoot if I remember that something was important. So initially my feelings were relief that I had a diagnosis, very sad. I went through a funk for a year. It was easy because I got diagnosed 2 weeks into COVID. And so it was very easy to isolate and be in a funk. I stayed with my daughter and my grandkids during that time, most of that time. So you get angry, my depression actually lifted. I historically have not been a particularly depressed person, had some mild bouts, but always was able to work. With this, it was a much deeper depression because, you know, it's Alzheimer's. Like, there's no happy rainbow and pot of gold at the end of that. But oddly, the depression started lifting, and it really clued me in that depression and anxiety for me were a consequence of Alzheimer's, not the cause of memory loss. And once I knew what was happening to me, there was a level of relief. The depression really did lift. Not that I don't have some very down days, but it did lift. Now, one of my biggest fears is what I may have passed on to my daughter and my granddaughter. Both my grandparents have Alzheimer's, and my mother is one of those people that I believe would be diagnosed with Alzheimer's, but she refuses to get any testing. My 2 cents, I think that 13,000 number is very low. I think there are many, many older adults who refuse, who lie to their doctors when the doctor says, having any memory problems? No, sharp as a tack. You know, I think people, you lose your independence. So for me, what's it like? And I have limited time and I talk too long, I apologize. So I think the best way for me to describe having Alzheimer's is that it is a series of losses. And so you're constantly cycling through grief reactions to the losses. So I lost self-confidence, I lost my ability to read books, whether it's auditory or, you know, it doesn't matter if it's audiobooks or real books. And I had a rather big library, which I eventually had to give away because I couldn't stand all the books that I wanted to read, and I can't read anymore. I can read, I can't hold the content, and so you just have to keep going back. And how many times do you want to read the first page? My finances, my sense of competence. I had been a highly competent person, and now I'm not even considered stove safe. I have to have somebody around me if I'm going to cook something. You know, I had been the regional director of mental health agencies, and here I am, can't do my own finances, can't be trusted with a stove. So sometimes I have moments of feeling childlike, but some of it is moments where I really am needing to be treated. I need things that I did as a younger person, and nobody in my world, thank goodness, is treating me as a child. I'm very fortunate in that because I see that with people with Alzheimer's all the time. Suddenly they're being spoken to like they're 2 years old. I lost my sense of time, my sense of independence. Oh, I'm losing my vision to it. I can't cook alone. I am all but stopped with driving. The last couple of weeks have been very hard. I finally was able to acknowledge that I have started sundowning. Sundowning is a phrase where in the late afternoon you just crash, and that's pretty much it for the day. Sometimes I get a second wind in the evening, but not very often anymore. And that's just like I was cruising along fine, and then I just started realizing that I wasn't, and so that's a blow because it's such a hallmark of Alzheimer's. So I sundown now, and in that sundown period, I have found that I can be quite emotional. Somebody was doing something with my gardens, and I got really upset, and that's just silly. So I think that there's just this emotional shift where those sort of more primitive emotions have started coming to the surface, and my ability to censor, as you can tell by how long I ramble, is gone, and you use censoring all the time with your emotions. And so if my word sensors are drifting away, my clothing sensors, I don't even care anymore. I'm 55. I've got Alzheimer's. I'm going to wear whatever the heck I want. You have to like find the good, but when I'm sundowning, I'm much more emotional, and that was a surprise that I really started noticing this week. So it's ever changing. You go through that sort of grief cycle over and over again. Okay, this is a drag, but I can accept it. I'm working my life without driving. Now we've got rail trail down to New York, so I can still do things, but there are new discoveries. You think you're plateaued and you're going to be there for a while, and then you get hit with the next thing, and you got to figure out how to accept that one too. So that's what it's like for me. I would like to say one of my that year of complete funk, it was really that I had no sense of purpose. I felt useless. I went from a high caliber job working for the state to feeling completely useless. So now I'm searching for ways. One of the ways that I do is to help the Alzheimer's Association, and I make these kind of ridiculous flowers that I'm selling as fundraiser. I'm not keeping any money, donating the costs and labor and everything. And different colors within the Alzheimer's Association. If you go to an Alzheimer's walk, you'll see the purple flowers and orange flowers and blue flowers. Well, in the real world, I am a mix, and I think there are many of us that are. So a lot of people who have yellow because they're caregivers, they sometimes have also lost another family member, or they're a strong advocate for the Alzheimer's Association, or they're doing something. So mine is blue because I have Alzheimer's, yellow because I took care of my grandfather who has Alzheimer's, and purple because my grandfather's died from Alzheimer's. So I feel like they're a way you can tell a story about your experience, as well as just like, oh, here's a couple bucks to help the Alzheimer's Association. So that's it.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thank you, Pamela. And there's a white flower too that represents the first survivor of Alzheimer's, because we're not there yet. So that's why and there it is, the white flower.
I bring the white flower. This is the only flower not for sale because it goes to the first person who survives.
Yeah, unless you have really a lot of money and you can find the cure right now.
Well, then you might get this one. This is my hope flower. It's almost all white, but I left just enough purple because we're not quite there. So I really do try to use them as storytelling methods.
So
Anyway.
Pamela says that she gives some of her time to the Alzheimer's Association. I feel like Pamela is a full-time employee of the Alzheimer's Association without taking the check. She recently got back from DC, where she spoke to our representatives down there, along with thousands of others from the Alzheimer's Association and beyond, to let them know what our needs are, what we should be doing from a federal level. But getting back to one of the points that Pamela mentioned about the 13,000 people, clearly Pamela is not represented in that number. There are plenty of other people that aren't represented because they're under 65, and then there are those, as Pamela mentioned, that aren't represented because either they have no interest in being diagnosed, they don't have the resources to go to the doctor, so they're not getting diagnosed, they're lying to their doctors, which happens, their doctor doesn't want to diagnose it because there's nothing they can do about it. So if they don't have a way to fix it, it's easier for them sometimes, and I'm not blaming doctors in any way. There are so many people in this melee of this process that are trying so hard to do the right thing, the resources just aren't there right now. And that's part of what we're trying to do, is make sure everybody gets the resources they need, and that's part of our conversation later on today. But so shifting from someone who has Alzheimer's to Betsy, whose mother, Jenny, has Alzheimer's, and she'll talk to you about Jenny, I'm sure. Who's a hoot, by the way. If you ever get it, if you haven't met her and you have a chance to meet her. Betsy lives here in Killington, so I look forward to hearing this story again.
So as Howard said, my name is Betsy Bianchi, and my mom would be here, but it's a little tough for her to do early morning things. So she is here definitely in spirit. She is the advocate. She's been advocating for things all of her life. This is not my comfort zone at all. I'm doing this more to support her because as everyone has been saying, this disease affects the person that has it, but it affects their whole family too. So when you talk about the people affected, not only is that 13,000 number, but the 26,000 number is not reflective of really how many people in Vermont are being touched by this devastating disease. My mom was diagnosed 8 years ago, but it took 2 years. She was living in New Jersey at the time, and her physician, we noticed some memory issues, and I encouraged my mom to talk to her physician and see if she could get some testing done, and her physician said to her that, again, there's nothing that we can do, so I'm not even going to test you, which did not sit well with me or my mom. Fortunately, the memory clinic down in Bennington was offering free testing at the time, and we went there, and she was diagnosed, and I would say that her physician did her a gross injustice, because there were things that can be done. It allowed her to be part of a clinical trial for one of the Alzheimer's drugs that she did have an adverse reaction, so she wasn't able to continue the clinical trial, but the fact that she was able to be part of that helps advance the science. So she's happy that she was part of that trial, and it also got her the PET scan, which you can't get a PET scan unless you're in a clinical trial, and that is the only real way to diagnose Alzheimer's short of an autopsy, which is a little hard to do when you're alive, right? So it was very good for her because at least she knew that that's exactly the disease that she had. And the other thing is some of the symptoms can be from something else. So if you aren't looking and you aren't trying to diagnose, you may be missing something that is curable. So that's one of the things that my mom is very adamant about, and I am, that it's worth it to get a diagnosis, and it's worth it to have the conversations. It's really hard. She's had people that don't want to be associated with her because they're afraid that they're going to catch Alzheimer's. I mean, there's so many myths out there, and there's so much fear, and it is a horrible disease. It's heartbreaking for me to watch, as my mom was a school social worker and had a very, very productive career, and she did a lot of things for people with special needs, and now she's in that group of special needs, and I want to be able to give back to her, and I appreciate you guys being here, because that is a way that we can give back. And I would encourage people to do the walks and to come to events like this and to spread the news and about the fact that we can talk about this. It doesn't need to be in the closet. And even if you're not good at public speaking, like me, that doesn't mean that you can't do it. This is a really important thing. It's a devastating disease. It's been a huge financial impact because my mom is able to do a lot of the activities of daily living by herself with some support, so the long-term care insurance doesn't think that she needs the support that she does need, and she needs that support, because although she can physically do a lot of the things, emotionally she can't. Ever since the beginning of the year, she's needed to have somebody with her, either myself or one of the aides, the whole time that she's awake, because she gets so anxious about what's happening next. So she can do everything. She looks fine. She can eat by herself. But she can't calm herself enough to know what's happening next and not get anxious, so anxious that then she has heart palpitations and we end up in the emergency room because of anxiety. So there's a lot more to this, and everybody's experience, the common thing is if you know one person with Alzheimer's, you know one person with Alzheimer's. Everybody's experience is a little bit different, but there's a lot of commonalities, and I appreciate the support here, and I look forward to seeing you guys all at the walk and in future events. Thank you very much.
So you'll notice some themes here. Betsy talks about the caregiver aspect of it, and Pamela talked about it as well. Betsy's husband, Chris, could probably be here and speak to the impact of being the spouse of a caregiver who in turn is a caregiver. Not only are they a caregiver, but think about the impact that has on that relationship and that household. I'm not living with my mother right now. She's living at my sister's house. I have kind of tertiary responsibilities. My sister deals with it every day. About 6 or 8 months ago, my sister just casually said, yeah, we went and saw Dad at the gravesite, and Mom didn't really remember she had been married to him for over 40 years. She thought she had been married to somebody else who was her first boyfriend when she was 15 or something like that. A little disturbing. But the point of that isn't that she forgot that to me. The point is that my sister said it so casually to me. So clearly, there's so much more going on with my mother than any of the other 4 siblings know about. I had a conversation with my mother at my house about 3 months ago. We sat there for 4 hours on the couch and just talked, and I thought it was a good day for her. 2 weeks later, I was at my sister's house, and my mother said, who was that other Howard I was talking to? He was great. Yeah, he was great, but that was me. And it never clicked. I mean, she never made that connection that was, in fact, we were the same person that she was talking to. So being the primary caregiver is one thing, and then it kind of goes down in steps. The further away you are, the less impacted you are, but you're still impacted. So it's just a terribly inclusive disease. You think about the 13,000 or call it 20,000 who are impacted in Vermont. It's not just about those 20,000 people. It's about so many of us. We had this event in Middlebury a couple weeks ago. There were 53 people there, all of whom, again, had similar situations to, I'm sure, many of you. And that's just a small group that wanted to come out at 8:30 on a Tuesday or Wednesday or whatever day it was. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Senator Hooker now, who's going to share with us some of the work she's done at the State House and all the wonderful things that we're working on together. So, thank you, Senator.
Thank you. I'm really humbled to be here because I'm listening to Pamela and I'm listening to Betsy and to Howard and their firsthand experience. And I don't have firsthand experience, although I did have an aunt and an uncle who both suffered from Alzheimer's and died with Alzheimer's. I had a teacher who died with Alzheimer's. He was not only my English teacher at MSJ, but he was my mentor when I came to the legislature. And currently, my sister-in-law is beginning to experience symptoms. And so, although I don't have the level, the depth of experience, I am really touched by hearing, what people are going through. But I just want to go over S206, and Senator Collmore will remember it, I hope, and tell you what it entails. First of all, Senator Brock, Senator Hardy, Senator Parent, and Senator Ingalls introduced the bill. So there were only 4 sponsors to the bill, but I think that if they had come around and said, please sign on, the rest of the Senate would have done it, because all of us are impacted by some way. As Howard said, you go down different levels, but everybody, I'm sure, has been affected by it in some ways. S206 embeds the state plan for Alzheimer's disease into the state plan on aging. The state has healthcare plans that we work on every year, trying to make sure that people are getting the services that they need. And this is one particular piece that hasn't been yet embedded into the plan. And when we talk about people who are aging, we know that Vermont is one of the oldest states in the Union, and that we need to pay particular attention to this. So what it will do, it will address home-based hospital and long-term care placements and transitions between these settings. It will support and support education for families and caregivers. Strategies to promote affordable and accessible long-term care and home and community-based services for those with Alzheimer's and related disorders. It'll require the Agency of Human Services to submit a plan by December 2022 to fund a permanent Alzheimer's disease coordinator, hopefully so that things can be channeled to one person, one group of people who will then have an idea of what's necessary throughout the state. And thirdly, it will require the Governor's Commission on Alzheimer's and Related Disorders to submit a professional education opportunities report before January 15th of 2024. It's quoted as saying the ADR shall create a work group to focus on this with the purpose of making recommendations to achieve a dementia-capable workforce and promote and expand opportunities for healthcare and human services providers and first responders to improve the diagnosis, treatment, and care of individuals with ADRD and their families and caregivers. Oh, and I guess that wasn't the final thing. Finally, it requires the Department of Public Safety to submit a report with recommendations for a silver alert system by November of 2022. So I'm looking at the 2024 and I'm thinking, oh, that's 2 years away. What are we going to do in the meantime? So there are things that can be done and things that should be done. I know that after putting out a piece on Front Porch Forum to help advertise this event, I had calls from people who were saying, are there any support groups for caregivers? Where can we go to get this kind of support? I didn't have those answers. I recommended that they call Howard or Meg Politi at the Alzheimer's Association to find out if there are such groups here in the area. So this is the type of thing that we need to do. With regard to the silver alert system, this seems like a no-brainer to me. We have other alert systems when someone goes missing. Why aren't we having this for elderly people, especially elderly people with disabilities?
And
So
I would like to
yes,
say
Pam.
something on Silver Alert. My husband, he's a youngin'. My husband is, his grandfather had Alzheimer's, died from Alzheimer's. And, we had a day of looking for him for hours and hours in the woods. He lived right around the corner from us. And dogs eventually had to be called. And hopefully with Silver Alert, there can be earlier police intervention for looking. I lived in in Maine for a few years, and they have Silver Alert or at least the county I was in had Silver Alert. And it really makes a difference to be able to get quick help when somebody is missing and have the need for that help broadcast fast. And as you can imagine, one of my great fears is I'm stuck out in the woods back behind my house with a dog barking, chasing me. In winter, he looked out at summer, my fear is in winter. But the Silver Alert thing I think is really important. All of us kind of come up with our own ways. I've got, a medical alert. There are now watches where somebody can know where you are all the time. There are phones now where other people can know where you are all the time. But getting lost is a very real thing, and it's part. I've phased out of driving for a bunch of reasons, but one of them, even with GPS, is fear of getting really lost. So that's an important piece that I hope to see get followed through.
And that's something that will happen. The recommendations from public safety will be in November, and Senator Colmore will be up there. I'm sure, I hope, and we'll bug him about making sure that these are things that move forward. Pam mentioned a couple of things that I'd just like to touch on if I can. She talked about not being really the face of Alzheimer's, not looking like, I said to her, you look wonderful, and I have to admit, Pam and her daughter came and testified in front of our committee, and I said to Pam, didn't you come with your mother? Because she's so young looking. And that's something that, we all have to take into consideration. It isn't just people over 65 who are suffering from this, and these are things that, we want to make sure that people are aware of. Also,
can I piggyback on that one
Sure.
thing that I've been meaning to say and have forgotten? Everybody who has Down syndrome, who lives long enough, gets Alzheimer's. They actually sometimes, some of the Alzheimer's research is done on people with Down syndrome. It used to just be people with Down syndrome died young. We didn't have the heart surgery, and but now they're living long, full lives. I used to work in that field and witness firsthand with a couple of people what that process looks like. They're a whole nother younger onset group that I don't know that anybody's looking at, except the individual case managers at developmental services going, like, it's in the beginning, some of my clients were the first diagnosed in the state as having Alzheimer's, but nationally it was starting to get noticed. And so that is another population of younger onset that really changes. It so fundamentally changes their personalities that you thought you've got this relatively easy person living in your house, your adult child or whatever, and then behaviorally it gets really challenged. And again, they're under 65. They have Medicaid, so that changes a lot. But on a personal level, it's very hard to watch somebody go through that who has no understanding sometimes.
And one other thing, you mentioned the roller coaster of emotions that people with Alzheimer's and their families go through. And Betsy, you talked about, people who don't want to associate with your mom because they're afraid they'll catch Alzheimer's. And these are just, as you said, the misconceptions and stuff. But in a way, it's a reality. I mean, I'm looking at my sister-in-law, whom I love like a sister, and she's changing. And it breaks my heart. And I look at my brother and what he's going through with this. And it's, it's heartbreaking. So thank you all for being here. And I know that there are others who are going to watch this on PEG TV. Thank you for being here. And who will, I hope, be able to help to broaden the awareness and to implement the things that are necessary for people going through this. Thank you.
It's interesting that, Senator, when you started speaking, you said, I haven't been directly impacted. Sorry, you
Got
have been.
you.
And if you weren't before today, you have been now. This is, thank you for the honesty and the emotion, and that's what we see so much on a day-to-day basis. I was talking to a gentleman a couple of weeks ago who, his father has Alzheimer's and lives with them, with he and his wife, and he said, I've been away from my father for 2 days in the last 4.5 years. They cannot leave their house, basically, without him. And his wife, who's a daughter-in-law, said we wouldn't have it any other way. But it's hard. And they were at a support group, and they just said it's just hard. We needed to be here today. So Lindsay will talk about the support groups in a minute, but it's hard to put into words. It's almost easier to see the emotion when you're talking about this disease than it is to put into words the impact that it has on folks. And I know I'm speaking to the choir here, but again, just thank you for being here, and thank you for all you're doing. Our next speaker, Lindsay. Lindsay is a rock star. They are rising junior at UVM. Lindsay spoke at our gala about 2 months ago, and the place was crazy excited about their speech. The personal touch of her story, their story, was just littered with kind of comic relief and the seriousness of it, which I think we all need. You need that comic relief. People who have the disease need that comic relief. I know Pamela often makes fun of herself, but, and her daughter constantly makes fun of her. That's another story altogether. But anyway, I want to turn it over to Lindsay, who's going to speak to you about kind of the programs and services that we have, and then lead us through an exercise as a group. So, Lindsay?
On the testing, getting everything ready, I can report I don't have syphilis. They checked for that. My son was like, come on, brain tumor. Let's have the brain tumor. Can rip that thing out. Yeah, no brain tumor. Yeah, you have to do stuff like that or else you just cry all the time, and that's no fun. That's no way to live. It does teach you much better to live in the moment, something I have counseled to clients for 30-something years. Sucked at it. Pretty good at it now.
Yeah, I mean, hoping to have a brain tumor really puts things into perspective for you.
Yeah, my son was really hoping.
Yeah, well, as Lisa mentioned, that Alzheimer's is very far expansive, and I'm 20, like, it's not something that you would assume affects me in my daily life. But Alzheimer's disease and dementia runs in my family. I have a great aunt with it right now. My grandfather is getting tested for Parkinson's, and my grandmother on my dad's side has dementia. And my family had to move in with them recently. They had to, my dad and stepmom and 3 younger siblings in elementary school all had to move in with my grandparents, which, as you can imagine, was very difficult for them with young kids and having to take care of 3 kids on top of someone with dementia. It's very challenging, for sure. But I just wanted to speak about some of the resources that we offer, which can all be found on communityresourcefinder.com.
Can you repeat that again, please?
Sorry?
Can you repeat that again?
It's communityresourcefinder.com, and we'll send a follow-up email with links to it, so it's not something that you need to go find on your own. But basically, all you do, you'll get to the Community Resource Finder, you click what you're looking for. So the most common ones are going to be support groups or education programs, and then you put in, your location. You can just put in Vermont, and it'll pop up with things in your area. There's a bunch of different support groups. There's a lot of different education programs. I hold certain education programs with all different topics. It goes through the 10 warning signs of Alzheimer's. There's one about understanding and responding to Alzheimer's behaviors. There's one about, healthy living for your brain and body. There's a whole bunch of different topics. So the ones that are coming up, which again, we'll send in a follow-up email. 10 warning signs are on the 15th at 10 a.m. There's legal and financial planning on the 19th at 9:30.
I cannot stress enough that you have to get your finances worked out. I mean, like literally, I got diagnosed and by the end of the week, I was in the lawyer's office. I called my financial helper. I get that living will in place so it really represents what you want. Get your will in place so it reflects what you want. Get your funeral plans arranged so it's what you want, because you're not going to have the wherewithal and other people are going to make all the decisions. So that was like my first week. It's like, okay, I'm going to be depressed next week. This week I have to get my act together. So that you teach that class is just critical. It's absolutely critical.
Absolutely.
So many people don't think of it, or they wait, or there's always time to have that conversation, and there isn't.
Is there anybody else that has not signed up on the?
Are these in-person courses? Are they online?
Some of them are in person, some of them are online. And there's also some
The one that's coming
hybrids.
up on the 19th?
The 19th, I believe it's online. Most of them are online, or at least hybrid. Just, with COVID, it's been easier to hold that. Which again is really easy. You could just log on they're usually about an hour, hour and a half, and just listen or ask.
I hate to say there was a benefit to COVID, but when COVID hit, we had to do a lot of things online, and we were able to pair up with some of our other chapters, Mass, New Hampshire, and Connecticut, and others that do more of these programs just based on population. So that has continued on to this point and will continue on.
My first support group was out of Massachusetts, and I found it by calling the Alzheimer's number.
Yeah, we have bookmarks up here if you want them. This is a great resource.
It is a tremendous resource, for me especially in the beginning.
Well, it is an 800 number, but they have your general area, and they can find resources for you in your area for you. So if you were interested in one of the education programs I mentioned, you can just call this number and say, hey, I'm in Vermont, what's available? And they can hook you up really quickly with that.
And don't let the 800 part of it scare you away. It's not your
very
typical
precise.
800 number. These are our colleagues who are manning the phones. These are trained medical staff. These are trained social workers. So just because it has an 800 in front of it doesn't mean you're not represented here in Vermont. They just know more than I do, which granted isn't that hard, but still.
Yeah, but definitely pick one of these up if you're interested. We have a ton of them, and it also lists out the 10 warning signs on the back. And it's just great to have on hand. And then before we move to our activity, I just wanted to see if anyone here offered any resources, knew of anything, wanted to say anything, had any advice, anything anyone wanted to mention.
Can I just ask, maybe Betsy, as a caregiver, are there support groups for caregivers? I mean, in the area? Because that was the question that I was asked.
There are some for caregivers. There's not any for people with the disease, although there are some early onset, but not for anybody.
But I think if you call that 1-800 number, you can get hooked up with one in another state.
Right. I'm part of one in New York State, actually, as an adult child of because there wasn't anything for that in Vermont. But a lot more is online too. So I know that they are working very hard at Community Health to try to get some in-person support groups up and running, but they need to do the training of the staff before to facilitate that first. So
that's what I was going to say as well. Community Health has got 3 people that have already signed up that are interested. We just need to go through the training with them. There are 3 live support groups in the state right now. There's one in Newport, there's one in Woodstock, and there's one in Williston. There are also, you can join any of them virtually. And then there are other virtual ones.
The virtual ones, I have to say, it's great.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm in my jammies, I'm, you know,
And for those
still in
people who can't
bed, I'm
leave the
petting my
house.
cat. My cat's like on the screen. In a way, for me, they have actually been more intimate because we are all in our sort of home, safe space. You see a cat walk across the keyboard, you know, like it almost, I've done a lot, I mean, I've provided a lot of support groups in my career, but in some ways, I have found the online ones more intimate in terms of people get right down to what is going on for them, and my suspicion is just because they're literally sitting in their own homes.
And many
But
of them
that's
are
not a
mixed.
match for some
They're a
people.
hybrid, so you can do either or. I think it is great for some. Some people can't leave the house for the
Yeah,
reasons we've already
exactly.
talked about. And then there are others that think, this is one of those hour-long stretches I can get out of the house and I'm gonna make time for. So it's good for them to get out and be with people that are experiencing similar things and tell stories and get advice. Because everybody who comes to the groups are typically at different stages as a caregiver. So it's a lot of sharing of resources, sharing of stories and how you dealt with it. But I think Betsy said it's a one person, one disease type of thing, and we're all different. But I think just hearing those stories is, in a way, supportive for folks to hear that they're not alone.
So the support group in Massachusetts, there was a person who was very active in his legislature working to make sure that people in Massachusetts who get younger onset get all the same services as traditional age. And that's when I was like, geez, I've been advocating for other people my whole life. I could do this. And that's what started me in this whole thing, was this one guy in Massachusetts in a support group that told me that's what he was doing, and it had changed everything for him. And it has absolutely changed everything for me, you know.
Anybody else still need to?
I just have a question. Oh, you were just talking about signing in?
Yeah. But that's
I did that already. But my question is, long story short, I have a sister that's in a facility down in Bennington, and we took care of her for a long time. We've got a lot of family around, but none of us could keep doing what we were doing. And so she's down there, but none of us can get there. It's 2 hours down and 2 hours back. So although we're all here in the Woodstock, Killington, Rutland area, we would love to be able to be more involved in what's happening, but we can't get to Bennington on a regular basis. So is there any way, and I tried a lot back in the day that we decided to go ahead and do Bennington, because there was no other place, but is there any way I can find people that could help us get her facility up here?
So the nursing homes and assisted care, they all have a social worker. That social worker has a responsibility to help you find the housing that she wants.
Okay. So any nursing home could refer me to the social worker?
They have one on site.
Okay.
So the one in Bennington, I think, is what Pamela's saying. The one in
Oh,
Bennington
okay.
Call the
can
one in
help you.
Bennington.
Okay.
And say, this isn't a fit for our family. We need your assistance to move her to X location.
Good.
And then she'll say there aren't any openings in X location, and that
Yeah.
could be completely true.
Yeah, and that's what
But
happened.
it
We
doesn't
did ask.
mean, but you can say, okay, once a month, I really need you, and put her on every waiting list for these 3 places we like.
Yeah, that would be
Because they
more
keep waiting.
convenient.
Yeah, because you want to be an involved family, and
Yeah.
you're not able
Yeah.
to.
Mhm.
Yeah, so
Great.
that's part of their job.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
So piggybacking on that, I work for community health. I'm embedded in the nursing homes.
Yeah?
So that might be something I could help you with.
Oh,
Wow. That was a good day.
yeah. Yeah.
With,
And you said you're in Bennington?
I'm embedded in nursing homes here,
Okay.
Rutland Health and Rehab, The Pines, and Mountain View Center.
Oh,
So I'll catch up with you at the end.
great. Good.
So a few minutes to see what people's thoughts are on the topics.
Oh, I'd like to just share one piece of information. Somebody had mentioned somewhere along the line, I think it might have been you, the wait time to get into the memory clinic. So I also work for community health, and our lead care manager recently sent out updated wait times for the memory clinics around here. So UVM is a year. However, Dartmouth and Bennington, I think Dartmouth was just a couple weeks for Dartmouth, and Bennington a couple months. So if those areas are more accessible for people, if they are accessible
They
for
can
people,
get there.
they can get in much quicker.
And what is
Currently.
the one in Dartmouth, what is that?
Dartmouth, I think, was 2 to 3 weeks.
To get into?
The memory clinic as a new patient looking to have an assessment for a diagnosis.
Okay, because she used to be a nurse at Dartmouth Hitchcock.
And I would
Has she seen a
recommend,
memory clinic? Does
From
She
experience.
did, her children did that, so
Yeah.
I wasn't involved in that.
And if it's at a point where maybe that's past that, that might not be that helpful,
Right.
but.
But it's good for other people to hear.
Dartmouth took us 8 months to get in.
Yeah, these are right now what I was told, so I mean, it could be, it's ever evolving and changing, and
Yeah.
obviously if I send
There's-
everyone there. it's
There's
gonna
also
build
two
up.
sides. My experience with the memory clinic, there's getting in to get tested, and then there's
Yeah.
getting in to get diagnosed.
Right.
And that was a really long gap.
And I don't know what the wait time is specifically for, if it's just for
And the testing, they don't tell you squat.
I don't know what happens on the other side, unfortunately.
by the way, my experience I experienced both Bennington and Dartmouth. Dartmouth is far better.
No doubt.
Far more accurate. I think they have more interest in the patient. The Bennington operation, as far as I was concerned, is more interested in the clinical trials. I moved my wife there, and I was astounded at the difference. They were saying she had mild cognitive impairment. When I went to Dartmouth, they said, you got to get it. She can't drive anymore, you can't do this, you can't do that, and they were right. So I think it's fortunate that it's 2 weeks to get in there. I was very happy, very satisfied with Dartmouth.
And does she live there in a facility, or do you take her back and forth?
Oh, no, good Lord, my wife's been in a facility for 3 years.
Oh, wow.
And I've been going through it for 10. And I don't know whether this is the time for it, but the reason I'm here is I'm very concerned about state regulations. My first experience with my wife's current residence, so there was an old lady on the floor bleeding. She'd fallen out of her wheelchair. The ambulance people came, took her away to the hospital. So, what happened here? Oh, we can't put a restraining belt on her. It's against regulations. So, she's bleeding. Had to go to the hospital. Turns out, December of 20, I find out my wife has a broken hip. They don't know where she fell, but she fell out of bed. We know that. She fell out of bed several times. I said, well, you know, $50 rail solves that. Oh, we can't do that. That's restraint. It's against the regulations. Well, this is absolutely absurd. The state is putting people in jeopardy. The gentleman across from me said that he was heard that you couldn't put a rail on the thing. He did it at home. And I would do the same thing. I don't care what the state says. I paid for and put on a safety belt on my wife's wheelchair, and the state came in and required them to take it off. We had to go to great trouble to adjust the wheelchair so that she wouldn't slide out from the bottom. I had the foot, we put a board across the bottom and one on the end so she couldn't slide out. So we're doing the same things but less effectively to try and protect her. And in her bed, when originally I brought in a futon, which was like a thermarest thing that was this thick, and I put it over her bed so that when she fell out of her bed, she'd fall onto this thing. And finally what they did was they spent, I think it was Medicare, $3,000, $4,000, $5,000. I don't know what it is for an electric bed that'll go down, so now she can only fall this far. And this is absolutely absurd. And in talking with the people, they say, the regulations don't address the differences between dementia and other things. We need to have that. Our folks need to be protected, and this is not protecting them. It's just to me, it's a travesty. Now, it may not affect a lot of people, and what I'm here today just on emotion. It's not going to do my wife any good. She's got a broken hip. It won't be fixed. She's going to die with it. But I sure hope that between advocacy from the Alzheimer's Association and our senators here today, that somehow you can persuade the state to look into this. I mean, this is a serious thing. It may not be widespread, but it's horrible. I mean, one old lady lying on the floor bleeding, my wife with a broken hip that's not going to get repaired. I just urge you folks to deal with this. It's frustrating enough to go through 10 years. Don't need this.
Thank you so much.
Thank
Sorry for
you.
sharing that. It's, I know it's not easy, but that's why we're here. Because
That's
we
a
want to
good
get
thing to
these
get
issues
up
out
on a
there
piece of
that we
paper,
can talk
though.
about.
So, I just wanted to add to what you just said, sir, because I know my grandmother passed away from Alzheimer's, and she was in a nursing home when she did. And she was in Middlebury, and so I was the one who was going every day to see her and be with her in the nursing home. My mom would drive over from Waitsfield every day also, but at night there was nobody with her. And she fell twice out of her bed in the middle of the night, and I was the one called to go, and I was with her at Porter Hospital while they were stitching her up, and they couldn't do bed railings, and eventually we convinced them to lower her bed, like you said, down to the ground, and then she had mats on both sides of her bed, so if she fell, it would only be a few inches and she'd fall onto these mats. But, it took her falling twice and ending up in the hospital twice before that, they were able to actually address it and do something about it. And I just thought that was ridiculous, I mean, we were already spending a large part of our day with her every day, making sure she was safe and okay. And then to have to, think, okay, does one of us have to spend the night with her too? Because otherwise she's not safe. That didn't seem okay.
I'm not sure where those regulations came from, but we certainly,
They've been in place a long time.
I was a public
They were supposed to be
guardian.
revised, I understand it, in 2018, and they were never revised.
And so
From what
that's
I
something that
understand,
needs to be
but
looked at.
this is a
I know-
serious thing, and it's growing. I mean, Alzheimer's is increasing.
Yeah, I was a
Yeah.
public guardian.
And your point about differentiating between people with dementia and others, because I know that, the restraint type thing, certainly people who deal with mental health issues realize that, this was something that was problematic. People were being restrained who shouldn't have been or whatever,
Right.
and so there's got to be that balance, but your point is
Yeah, but what they
well
do with
taken.
Alzheimer's patients, they drug them to death.
And then they're,
I made the horrible mistake of sending her to a geriatric psych unit in Massachusetts. When I took her down there, she could walk, she could talk, she could feed herself.
God.
She came back as a vegetable. It took us 3 months to get her off those drugs. So talk about restraint, drugging them to death. Maybe
In
easy.
Vermont, that's illegal as
Considered
well. It's
chemical
called
restraint.
chemical restraint.
Well, they did it, and she came back, and the medications were there, and they were feeding them.
Yeah, no, Massachusetts, I can't say.
And we finally said, stop it.
Saying it's illegal.
And between myself and the people at the residential care facility and the physician, we stopped it. But, this whole thing is so obnoxious because I'm her agent, so I speak for her. I want her to be restrained. That means she wants to be restrained. The doctor wants to be restrained. I'm also family. Family wants to have her restrained, if you want to call it that. I want her protected. And I find it very offensive, extremely offensive, that the state can come in and countermand what I want and what the doctor wants. I think that's outrageous and should be stopped.
So it's a complicated situation. I was a public guardian, that was my last job, working for the state, and coming across people that were very improperly restrained. It's still a modern technique, yeah. Locked in rooms, filthy. So, I think that from what you're saying, that the things for elders are the same rules for developmental services, except developmental services have these other ways that you can actually get to a point where you can seatbelt somebody in their wheelchair, you can have rails on their beds. We have a process to make that happen, that a board that looks at the human rights versus the physical risks. So I don't know if a similar thing exists with this end of life, but if not, that a process where you can make your case, have a doctor sign off on it. Unfortunately, there are families that do not treat their family members well when this happens. And because of them, the reasonable requests have become unreasonable, like the system has become unreasonable.
Well, there are some regs in place, but the doctor has to prescribe the period of day that she can have a seatbelt on or not have a seatbelt on, and they can only do it then. Well, that's absurd. Again, for the safety of the patient, the family and the person's agent and a doctor prescribe from it, why would you not do it?
Yeah.
I mean, it's very frustrating. It's frustrating enough to go through this 10 years, but to have this added to it is really a problem. And I'm sure that I'm speaking of a small percentage of the people who have been hurt this way.
I don't think you are speaking for a small percentage.
I don't think so either.
Coming from a nursing home, working on the floors in a dementia unit, over the years, they've taken everything away. I mean, we used to have clips, so if they lean forward, it would alarm and we'd know. They've taken those away. We used to have, to keep people from, because they took the rails away, we'd put, the swimming noodles the kids use.
Yeah.
We'd stick them under the sheets, so if they went to roll over, they wouldn't go over them. They took those away. I mean, it is, working in a facility and living through that, it's super frustrating. We're short-staffed. I mean, there's
such a
40 of them, and on overnights, there's 2 of us. I mean,
For how many people?
40 patients sometimes, yeah.
You can watch them all night long, can't you?
Right, I mean, if you got several people that tend to fall out of bed, you can't, I mean, literally, you're patrolling the halls all night long, hoping, oh, I caught you, okay, what do you need, or they're awake. And what we used to do is, I mean, if people were awake, we would get them down into the day room, which was in the middle of the wing, and we'd always have someone sit there, so, we keep them entertained, feed them or whatever, but as a nurse working in those facilities, it's super frustrating.
Thank you guys so much for sharing. This is exactly why we're here, and this is also why we've passed out those note cards. I don't know if you guys have noticed, but there's signs around with different questions. How can we advance risk reduction, early detection, and diagnosis? How can we increase access to care and support, as well as how can we improve quality of care, and as well as any input, all of these concerns that you guys have been bringing up. If you don't mind just writing it down and putting it on one of these, so that we have that feedback, and then we can then use that moving forward. That would be amazing. And then while you're doing that, if anyone was interested in those videos we were talking about earlier, that's basically just having you tell your story, so that legislatures can get sort of a mini version of this experience, so that they can, have a more personal touch and have a more familiar contact with this issue, and so they can sort of see how it's affecting families on a more personal level. And we are also giving out these awesome t-shirts if someone wants to do a video. So if you're interested, let me know. But other than that, just continuing to talk about this and then filling out those note cards.
Can I just say for the video, because even at my age, I was like, they give you like 2 or 3 guiding questions, and it only takes about 2 or 3 minutes. So it's not.
And we're gonna film it and upload it for you. So you just have to talk.
So these are the questions, just so you can think about it. Your name and where you're from, tell us your connection with Alzheimer's or dementia, who had the disease, how has it impacted your life, and what do you hope for? Those are the pretty straightforward questions there, so.
Where's the filming being done?
We'll probably just go in the hallway and I
Oh,
can just
you're
record
gonna do
everything
it
on
here.
phone, yeah.
Alright. Can I ask Brian a question?
Sure.
Is there anything in the pipeline to address what these people are talking about with the nursing homes and so forth and these regulations? Yeah, I don't even know what agency is making these
Well, I hate to punt it back to Senator Hooker, but she's vice chair of the Health and Welfare Committee, and that's where the jurisdiction lies in terms of the disease itself. I don't know whether the Department of Health is the one that makes those rules. I'm assuming it's done through the rulemaking procedure and not a statute. But I promised Larry earlier, I'll look into it for sure. And if there's a way that we can, and I appreciate what you're saying too, there's got to be a gradual distinction made between just a patient in a hospital kind of thing and someone with dementia. Because I
Yeah.
think they are two different
I
landscapes.
think if you'll look at the developmental services rights and restrictions.
Yep.
Now it's not perfect, but my uncle who was under developmental services, though by the end he had Alzheimer's too, we had approval for a seat belt around him. We couldn't have the bed rail, but we could buy, they make bed rails that pull down from the wall. So it couldn't be a permanent restraint. It was just because he would tip out of bed and hurt himself badly. So that was how we worked around that one. But developmental services, there's an ethics committee, it gets reviewed, and every time I presented anything, it turned into well, that sounds reasonable, okay. You do have to have a part of how do we make sure this person isn't stuck in bed all the time because somebody's now keeping the rails all the time. But you work through that, you have a plan. This is the ethical plan of where you can use restraints.
Yeah. Okay.
And in the developmental service, even a chemical restraint, you actually have to have a plan, unless the person's in an emergency room, and then any emergency room doctor can pop them without all. But this system exists. It's just in another department.
Okay.
And I think that
Dale is the main resource for that.
I think that Larry's point about the rules were supposed to have been looked at in 2018 and more needs to be addressed.
That's what I was told
Yeah.
by the lady who was on the governor's committee on Alzheimer's or whatever it was for 8 years and said it was a total waste of time. She couldn't get anything done. And that I was wasting my time coming here today.
And that's part of the legislation that we passed, which looks at the governor's commission and, you know, the work that they're doing and what they should be doing.
Yeah, she said it was just a total waste of time in 8 years. Got nothing done.
I think that's going to be very different. Meg Collied is now chairing it from the Alzheimer's Association. Honestly, I'm hoping to become a member. I think that somebody with Alzheimer's should be part of the table. But it's the configuration, I understand, has changed quite a bit, hasn't it?
It has, and now with Meg chairing the group, Meg comes from the system. She was the chief of staff for the lieutenant governor at one point. So she knows the system very well. And she knows, she's been on staff for about a year now. And it's clear to me how well she recognizes the blockades and the inaction of those 8 years, or seeming inaction. There are things that are being talked about on some of those calls today that were talked about 2 years ago when I started that haven't really gone anywhere. So she's going to change that. I firmly believe that. So
She's
I
a
don't think this is a
powerhouse.
waste of your time.
And Meg would be here, but she has a medical issue, so she really, really wanted to be here. She said, this is the fun stuff, this is the good stuff that I really get good impact, so she would have loved to have
Heard her
heard
story.
what you had said. And it did not fall on deaf ears. We will make sure that she hears that.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's all I was gonna say. She'll definitely hear this feedback.
I don't have to sign that thing.
I'll need
Talking about what Larry said with the rails, we took care of my mother at home. Visiting nurses ended up coming. They brought a bed in, and I said, can we get another rail? She had fallen twice and busted her bones. And, no, we can't do that. I said, what do you mean you can't do that? She says, you can't do that. I said, she can't hardly walk anyways. I said, it's safer for her to have it, we got her own rail and put it on there. Because you had to. She was just gonna fall. I mean, I says, that doesn't make any sense to me, but I understand that some people, one of the visiting nurse says, we took very good care of her. He says, I don't see that all the time, so I understand that, he said some people don't take good care of their family. But to me, it was just a common sense thing. I mean, she tried to walk with the walker and fall down. I took 2 ski poles hooked to the thing so I could stand right behind her. She could walk by herself. And the visiting nurse says, that's a wonderful idea, you ought to patent that. I'm standing right behind her so she can't go backwards and I can hold the rail so it don't tip over. But it was just common sense, but common sense isn't quite so common anymore.
Well, thinking creatively instead of what can I purchase to make this work, you looked at what you had.
Yeah, that doesn't make a lot of sense to me because I work at the Council on Aging and I've worked there for 9 years, and one of the most common things that we help caregivers with at home is bed rails because their loved ones are constantly falling out of bed with Alzheimer's. So I see it all the time. So I don't know why that is in place.
Well, we'll find out.
Yeah, absolutely do.
Good.
Because bed rails can save people.
I think one thing that I'm gonna do is try to meet, well, I know one of them, I'm meeting with the people who are running for Peter Welch's seat. He has been a very good working partner on these issues, and I think it's totally okay to make sure whoever the replacements are will be just as dedicated, and now's a really good time to find out. So, take an opportunity to bump into them. Like, you don't have to be an advocate to take opportunities to be an advocate.
And Senator Hooker mentioned it earlier, they could have gotten every senator on the floor to co-sign that bill. It's just about asking. We don't have enemies at the State House. We don't have anybody that's saying, Alzheimer's, no way, we're not touching that. We've got people that want to be a part of this and want to help. Most of any age can be affected, but most of the people who are working at the State House in these roles either have loved ones, they've got parents, they've got spouses, brothers, sisters, who are all dealing with this, so.
Scared for themselves, because
Scared for themselves, yeah. It's not, like I said, it's not a quiet disease anymore. We're gonna make sure it's not a quiet disease.
And the nice thing about it with the current political divide is this isn't a red issue. It's not a blue issue, it's purple. So it really affects her. There you go.
So if you want to take a few minutes and write down any thoughts you might have to any of these questions, that would be great. And like Lindsay said, we'll collect those, and we've got a list of 3 pages from the Middlebury event, and then we've got 2 more events coming up, and we're going to compile them all, share them with our partners, design some of our advocacy efforts around them, because there are definitely themes.